Hi, so I'm Anna Jorrins and I'm the team leader for EYFS policy at the DfE. I'm going to give a bit of an update on the EYFS reforms, mainly today. But as Jill said, before I go into my update, we did want to play a video from our new Minister for Children and Families, who is Will Quince MP. So I think I'm actually going to hand straight back over to NCB to play that video before I kind of launch into my update.
Hello, I'm Will Quince and I'm delighted to have been at the Department for Education. I'm passionate about improving the life chances of children and young people, and the Secretary of State, Nadeem Zahawi, and I are thoroughly looking forward to working with all of you, working on the front line in the early years sector to help us achieve this. The last 18 months have been extremely challenging for all of us, and this has been particularly true for the early years sector. Your response to COVID-19 has been of national importance, and I want to thank you for rising to these challenges with such professionalism. I've already seen on visits to nurseries, playgroups and other settings the incredible work going on, and I want to take this opportunity to say thank you for your commitment, hard work and dedication in looking after the children in your care so well, and for doing your utmost to deliver high quality early years education in extremely difficult circumstances. Now, I know you continue to face significant challenges due to the ongoing impact of COVID-19 on early years children and staff, and that you need the support of government. And that's why we worked hard leading up to the recent budget to make the case for the importance of supporting children in their earliest years. And you will no doubt be aware the Chancellor announced additional investment in the recent budget. And it gives me great pleasure to restate the commitment we made to invest additional funding for the early years entitlements worth £160 million in 2022-2023, £180 million in 2023-24, and £170 million in 2024-25 compared to 2021-2022. Now, this is for local authorities to increase hourly rates paid to childcare providers for the government's free childcare entitlement offers, and reflects the cost of inflation and national living wage increases. And we also announced a significant new investment of £300 million to transform Start for Life and family help services in half of the council areas across England. Now, this will fund services such as breastfeeding support and parenting programmes, and create a network of family hubs, and it will provide thousands of families access to the support when they need it, giving babies the best start in life. And this delivers on Dame Andrea Ledsam's important Best Start for Life review and on our manifesto commitment to champion family hubs. Now, following the successful nationwide delivery of the Holiday Activities and Food Programme in 2021, we're investing over £200 million a year for the programme to continue providing disadvantaged children with enriching activities and healthy meals during the school holidays. And these investments are in addition to the £180 million COVID-19 recovery funding already committed for interventions with children and training of earliest staff and leaders to support children's learning and development. And I'm clear that we must address the impact of COVID-19 and the pandemic on the youngest children. We're seeing disparities in child outcomes at age 5 even before the pandemic, and these disparities have sadly been exacerbated by COVID-19. Our investment in early years education recovery will help practitioners and settings deliver high quality provision and address the impact of the pandemic on children with a focus on the most disadvantaged areas. This recovery programme builds on our reforms of the early years foundation stage, which became statutory in September, and supports our aims of improving outcomes and closing the attainment gap at age 5. Now, I know many of you will have been actively involved in the debate and process that shaped the reforms, and now in the work that is underway in nurseries, reception classes and amongst childminders across the country to implement them. Now, I'm excited to join you on that journey to bring these changes to life, and I've really enjoyed seeing firsthand how practitioners in settings are using the changes to benefit children and to focus on the challenges they're facing in light of the pandemic, particularly around early language, maths and personal, social and emotional development. And my department will continue to work with you and also with Ofsted as the changes are embedded, and to deliver a joint message around what Ofsted will and won't expect to see during inspections, particularly in terms of unnecessary assessment paperwork. Which brings me to the theme of today's event, which my department has worked with the National Children's Bureau to deliver. So today's event is focused on 3 topics: supporting children with SEND, early years and COVID-19 recovery, and Ofsted inspections under the early years foundation stage. And I know just how important these topics are across the sector. I hope that the event is useful in informing you about the work of the department and supporting your practice and sharing with early years colleagues. So thank you again for the vital work that you do to give our youngest children the best possible start in life.
So yeah, I just wanted to start by reiterating the thanks that we've already had from Jill and from our Minister, from the team at DFE as well. We obviously know that it has been really challenging and continues to be so, and that all of you working in early years provision have made such a tremendous effort for all of the children in their settings this year. And we do know that that effort is going to have a lasting impact on all of the children. Obviously, as our intention kind of increasingly shifts away from the immediate response to the pandemic and more towards the future and recovery, it's going to be more important than ever to be championing what you're doing in early years education and just the crucial role that you've got in supporting children to realise their potential. And we are going to have a specific session later on education recovery, and you're going to hear a bit more about how we are investing £180 million in building a stronger and expert early years workforce in the sector. We hope you find today's event really useful, both through these dedicated sessions and also through the chance to network with other colleagues on the call a little bit later on. Obviously, we know it's still a little different to be doing this kind of thing digitally, but I think we've all got quite used to it over the last 18 months or so. And we know that NCB have made a huge effort to kind of make this session as engaging as possible. So as I mentioned before, I'm going to start with an update from DFE on the EYFS reforms, which I think all of you will know have been statutory since September this year. The new EYFS brings in a strengthened early years curriculum and a clearer approach to assessment. And the key aim is to improve child outcomes at age 5, particularly in early language and in literacy. We also see the EYFS reforms as having a really key role in helping to address the impact of the pandemic on young children. And Jill's already mentioned how we know that they spent so much of their lives kind of in the pandemic. And we think the reforms are a really important platform for supporting them. And just to say that the curriculum also obviously supports strengthened PSED and early maths as part of that broad curriculum that we're bringing in. So the other key aim of the reforms, again, as you'll all know, is to reduce the amount of time we think practitioners and teachers are spending completing unnecessary paperwork and tick lists and recording children as either on track or not on track, and just kind of shifting that focus and efforts more towards interacting with children in your care, which we know is kind of much more important for improving their outcomes. So as I've mentioned, although the reforms were only statutory since September this year, over 3,000 early adopter schools did implement the new EYFS 1 year early, so during last academic year. And we used that year to seek their feedback. And you can see some quotes from them on the slides there, which I won't read out, but hopefully you can see that we've been getting some really kind of positive messages through from them, in particular on how they've impacted where teachers kind of feel that they've been able to focus their efforts. So we did conduct some voluntary surveys with early adopter schools in July and January. And through those, we heard that around 70% of early adopters felt that the reforms will help to reduce their workload in the longer term. And we are continuing to use this feedback and to work with early adopter schools to make sure that we are providing the relevant and more timely support for all settings. We do obviously know that DFE and Ofsted need to continue to work with the sector to support kind of understanding and implementation of these changes, and really just keep delivering the messages that we want to on how they bring in an effective curriculum and assessment, and diverting energy away from tracking and more towards that language-rich environment and learning with the children. Just to say that we do obviously also recognise the vital role of local authorities in all of this, and we do absolutely intend to keep working with local authorities on this journey as we all implement the reforms. I think moving on to the next slide, Jill. Yeah, so as I just said, we've been working really closely with early adopter settings just to kind of hear about the support that they need and had needed to kind of deliver the reforms as they're intended. And we have developed a range of support to try and do this. And this slide here sets out some of what we've been doing. So hopefully lots of you will have heard of the new online platform, which is Help for Early Years Providers. And that's a new service that was launched in May this year. It's aimed at childminders and nursery leaders and practitioners in preschool settings. And on there, you'll find lots of resources, advice and support that will help you understand the requirements for each of the areas of learning and development and what those should mean in practice for your setting. We developed all of the content in there, both on things that childminders and practitioners have told us that they need, and also what works for them. And it's been designed with these settings in mind. We have received really positive feedback about the service so far, so I would really encourage anyone who hasn't been on it already to go on there. And we have obviously extensively tested it with users throughout the process as well. And since it was launched this year, we've had nearly 40,000 users access that site. As well as the online platform, we've also published a new Development Matters document. And that's to support settings with delivering an effective early years curriculum that has language development running all the way through the heart of that. So Development Matters was led on by Dr. Julian Grenier, who is head teacher of Sheringham Nursery School and Children's Centre in Newham in East London. And since it was published, it has been downloaded or viewed over 110,000 times, which we're really pleased about. If you look at Development Matters, you will notice that there's been a shift away from kind of narrow age bands towards a fewer number of age bands, which was a very kind of deliberate decision. And that's to try and move practice away from some of the tracking behaviours that I was talking about earlier, and kind of feeling the need to track every child against quite a narrow set of development statements, which we think is taking adults away from interacting with children. So in addition to Development Matters, we've also recently published an updated guidance document for parents. So that's called What to Expect in the EYFS. And that now aligns with the new EYFS framework and also with Development Matters. We did test this throughout the process with parents and carers and tried to understand how they tend to access this kind of resource. So we've made sure that it's easy to read on mobile devices and doesn't have huge amounts of dense text. And also it's quite easy to click through it and kind of refer to the section that's relevant and find that quite easily. And finally, during the last LED events and engagement we've done with local authorities, we have heard that people wanted more information about supporting children with SEND under the new EYFS. So a new document specifically on that has been published that was led on by Pen Green Children's Centre. And that offers practitioners guidance and resources on supporting children with additional needs in SEND. And we are going to hear more from Pen Green directly about that later on in the event today. Not on the slides, but just to say that we've also provided a series of webinars that are aimed at different kind of groups within the sector. So you've got those aimed at PVIs and childminders, one for school leaders, and one for reception teachers as well. And collectively, they have been viewed over 60,000 times to date. So if you haven't viewed those already, we'd definitely encourage people to go and look at those. And we've also run events for local authorities, so hopefully your local authority will be well placed to offer guidance and support to all of the settings in your area. And we will obviously be continuing to work really closely with Ofsted as the reforms are embedded, just to keep delivering these joint messages about what Ofsted will and won't expect to see during inspections, and particularly with regard to the assessment paperwork that I've mentioned. Again, this isn't on the slides, but I did just want to spend some time talking specifically about the new early learning goals and what previously we had as exemplification materials. So obviously we do want to support schools to really effectively assess their reception children in a way that is meaningful and also proportionate. And as part of the reforms, we're really encouraging schools to think differently about the way that they do observations and tracking, and also how they collect evidence to kind of evidence children's progress. And that's really specifically about the EYFSP that takes place at the end of reception year. So all of this means that we are taking a very different approach to exemplification materials than we did under the previous EYFS. And we won't be producing a new set of written exemplifications against all 17 new ELGs. So instead of doing that, we are producing a collection of case study videos that demonstrate teachers and school leaders having professional discussions about children holistically and how they support their EYFSP judgments. So we do hope that those videos will support teachers in making their assessments, but also just place that critical emphasis on professional discussions about child development, and really help to move people away from the pressure to feel like they have to collect a lot of physical evidence to support each aspect of the new ELGs. We are in the process of filming these videos in schools at the minute, and they will be available at the beginning of the spring term this academic year. I think that was everything I was going to say on the EYFS reforms. Sorry, we move on to the next slide. Yeah, so I did just want to touch really briefly on educational recovery. So I mentioned earlier there is a dedicated session on this that I think we're going to go into next. So I won't go into too much detail on that right now, other than to say that we have committed 180 million to education recovery in the early years. And this includes the announcement of 153 million of funding for high quality professional development for practitioners that we announced in June. This recovery funding sits alongside the recent budget. So in that, we confirmed that government's investing additional funding for early years entitlements. So that's worth an extra 160 million next year, 180 million the financial year after that, and then 170 million in the final financial year of this SR period. And that funding is for local authorities to increase the hourly rates that they're paying to childcare providers for government's childcare entitlement offers. You might have seen in the recent budget announcement as well that 500 million was committed over the next 3 years to transform Start for Life and family help services, and that's going to be in half of council areas across England. And that funding will directly fund a network of family hubs, Start for Life services, perinatal mental health support, breastfeeding services, and also parenting programmes. And as we just heard from the Minister as well, we are also investing 200 million a year for the continuation of holiday activities and food programme. So that provides activities and healthy meals for disadvantaged children throughout the school holidays. So I think there's a lot of consensus on what we need to focus on to improve early education over the coming months and years. We do just want to acknowledge that there are still significant challenges that settings are facing, whether that's COVID-19, workforce recruitment and retention, and just some of the things that I've talked about today about continuing to move away from heavy assessment workloads, so practitioners can be freed up to spend more time focusing on supporting children. Obviously, we acknowledge that there aren't any easy answers to this, but we are really confident that our new ministerial team are really committed to working with the sector to address these issues. And will be really strong champions of the early years and just ensuring that we have a system that is delivering for children and for parents. So I'm going to leave you there with the final slide, which I think we need to move on to, which just sets out some useful links to some of the things that I've mentioned today, and which I think will be shared kind of following these sessions. And I will now hand back over to NCB for the next session, which I think, as I mentioned, is focusing specifically on COVID-19 recovery.
Okay, so I'm now going to hand over to Gareth Conyard and Anna Mercy from the Department for Education, who are going to talk to us a little bit more about recovery in the early years. So if you have any questions during the presentation, if you would like to pop those in the chat bar down the side, we're going to take these away and give them to DFE so that we can produce a frequently asked questions document that we'll be able to share after the event. So good morning, Gareth. Thank you so much for joining us. I will get up your slides. They should hopefully be coming through as we speak. There we go. You should hopefully be able to see those now. So over to you, Gareth. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Jill. Thank you so much for doing this, and a big thank you to the National Children's Bureau for organising these events, which are invaluable for us. I think, as Jill said, we are eager to hear your questions and comments on this topic, and I'm going to talk through the investments we're making around education recovery that Ada alluded to earlier. Obviously, I'm going to go through it in fairly high levels. I'm sure there are some specific questions that you'd like to ask, so please do, and we'll make sure we get back to you. I also, before I got into this, just wanted to say two broad reflections. First, I hope that you enjoyed the video from Minister Quince. Will is, I think, more excited, more enthusiastic than I've seen most ministers when they start a new job. He's really keen to embrace this agenda and do some really positive things, and I hope you got some of that in the video, but it is genuine. So I'm obviously delighted in the video, but I think we would have struggled to stop him doing it because he's really keen to engage. And the second thing I wanted to say is that I hope that as I go through this, and indeed as the rest of the session happens today, you will see reflected some of the things that you mentioned in that Menti poll at the beginning of this session. So things around PSCD, things around early language, there are things that we have heard and we have tried to factor in to the investments we're making to support the education recovery work. So I'm not surprised, but I'm pleased to see those themes reflected, because I think we have heard them and we've tried to respond to them. Going on to the slide on the screen, this basically at a high level explains why it is that we are making the investments in the early years recovery package that we've got, and in particular in the early years workforce. I'm not going to read everything off the slide, and again, hopefully most of it makes sense, and I'm sort of preaching to the converted, if you like, but it does come from a place of recognition on our side that the investment in the earliest years is an absolutely crucial one. That is always important, but it is increasingly important against the context of the pandemic, where we know that babies and children have had such a disrupted experience, not just in terms of being unable to access provision at times, but also more broadly around how family life is working and functioning. The crucial bit that we're trying to make sure we do here is recognise that if you want to have a positive impact on babies and young children, you need to make sure you are supporting the workforce, the people who are actually spending every day with those children, with those parents and adults as well, surrounding them in the family group. And that if you want to see improvements and positive outcomes for young children, you need to make sure the staff have the tools and the skills they need to do the right thing by those children. So we are focusing predominantly in this recovery package on providing support, training and such like for the workforce. The amount of money, again, as Ada alluded to, is £180 million. Now, we have at different times historically spent money on early years workforce development programmes, but not to this scale and not quite in this way. And on the next slide, I'll talk through the different components of the package, but you'll see it's wide ranging and covers lots of different elements, and that's in part to recognise the fact that we want to make sure we are hitting as much of the workforce as we can, if you like. The £150 million is made up of investments that we announced back in June as an amount of money, and then we spent the last few months working with experts across the sector to help refine those programmes, and we have also been working with Treasury to finalise the detail of them. And one of the things that we were really pleased about with the budget announcement wasn't just the broader increases in funding for early years, but confirmation that this money was there, and that we're able to finally start procuring the providers, deliver the training on the back of it. As I said, there's 153 million that was announced in June. In addition to that, we already have £17 million for the NELI programme, the Nuffield Early Language programme, and we have the money already invested in the second phase of the professional development programme, which takes us up to this £180 million figure. Collectively, as I said, what we want to try and make sure we're doing with that is create a series of interventions for everybody in different bits of the workforce, different stages of their career, working in different settings, and of course based on the needs that people have, depending on their context, their circumstances. So that's what we've tried to do. I will go through each of those elements in a moment, but finally on this slide, just to say that as well as obviously trying to reflect what we've heard from you throughout the pandemic, what you've learned, what you've experienced, we've also tried to make sure that this aligns with everything that Ada just talked about so clearly around the development of the new EYFS. And we want to make sure that everything we're doing is consistent with what's happening in the EYFS. Of course we do, and hopefully we've achieved that. So hopefully you'll see that as you get into the detail of the programmes. Can we move on to the next slide, please, Jill? Brilliant, thank you so much. So as this slide sets out, here are the different components of the programme. I will go through them quickly. As I said at the beginning, I know there'll be lots of specific questions you'll have on them, so please put those in the chat bar and we'll collate them and go from there. So in terms of this 153 million education recovery package, there are three key elements I think that we need to focus on at the beginning. So the first is this three elements in a stronger practice programme. The first of those is a new universally accessible online training package intended to increase the skill of practitioners and improve their knowledge of child development, and that's obviously to try and help them improve the support they can give to the children in their care. The second element there is targeted at those settings in most need of support, where we're providing access to mentoring support for early years practitioners to help strengthen children's learning and development. And we're also alongside that providing some bespoke whole setting and leadership support. So that is really a package of support for a setting with some targeted mentoring support for some practitioners, and you'll hear a bit more about that shortly. And then the third element to try and strengthen the quality of practice is the Early Years Innovation Programme, and that is a set of funding to try and encourage innovation in the system and learn from what works well, and then share that practice across the system. One of the things I think that's most obvious to me when I look at the early years sector is that there are real pockets of excellent practice and innovation, and it really is best if those people who are dealing with babies, dealing with young children, dealing with families day in day out are also those who are able to feedback that experience and develop that innovative practice, either directly or working through organisations who help encourage this, organisations like Pen Green, for example, who Ada mentioned earlier. On top of that, we are expanding the Professional Development Programme, PDP. So phase 1 of the Professional Development Programme is already being delivered. Phase 2 is in train, and we've secured funding for a third phase of the Professional Development Programme to roll out in the future that will take this to be truly national. We're also expanding training to increase the number of staff in group-based providers and childminders with an accredited level 3 SENCO qualification. And again, this is something that came up in the comments earlier. We know that SEND is a crucial issue, and in particular we know the absolutely fundamental role the early years practitioners play in identifying and responding to SEND needs, and we want to try and make sure we're supporting that. We're also undertaking a review of level 3 qualifications to try and get a better sense of what that market looks like. Our starting point is one of understanding, and we know there's a variety of qualifications out there, and we know that people have different experiences of them. So we want to start off by trying to just make sure we understand that market as effectively as we can before we then work out whether or not there is something else useful that government can do in this space to simplify and improve. We are looking to increase substantially the number of places for initial teacher training in early years. That again, hopefully, is a very positive thing for the system to try and encourage more people to take this pretty sophisticated training and development route and to provide funding for them to do that. We have an expansion of programs to train early years practitioners to support parents with home learning, and they are targeted at those families who would benefit the most from those sorts of interventions. That includes things like intensive home visiting programs as well as group-based interventions, and it is based on trials and evidence around supporting children early language and social and emotional development. Again, that's something that we've been working hard on for a while, and we're pleased to see that get further impetus through this funding package. The final elements on here are the other elements I alluded to earlier that make up the 180 million total investment. So that includes the funding already announced for the second phase of the professional development programme. That's £10 million being spent in that to support staff in pre-reception settings. That's covering 50 local authorities, targeted specifically at those who are most struggling because of COVID issues. This builds on the first phase of the professional development programme, but in addition to the early language and maths elements, it's also going to cover personal, social and emotional development, as well as some elements on workforce mental health and wellbeing. And just to repeat the point I said before, I think that's reflected in the things that you've said matter most through this session. I mentioned the £17 million for the Nelly programme. Two-thirds of primary schools have already signed up to this. So we estimate that around 90,000 reception age children will be getting extra support with their speech and language development because of this investment, which is obviously great news. And then finally, we are in the process of procuring somebody to deliver a new NPQ, National Professional Qualification, in early years leadership. NPQs are a qualification that have existed in the school sector for a long time. They were developed back in the days of New Labour, initially aimed at head teachers. They are a very well-established, high-status qualification in that school sector. So we're delighted to be able to create one for the early years, reflecting the status, of course, that early years should have and does have in our minds. And we've targeted this specifically at early years leadership at this stage. The framework is published, so you can look at that. And there is a procurement activity underway to secure a supplier to deliver the qualification from September next year. And those places will be fully funded, is our intention. So the actual cost of the course will be provided by the department in line with the wider NPQ programme. I'm going to stop there. That I know was very, very quick. So please do, as I said before, ask questions, and we'll make sure we get back to you with the detail on the back of all of this. But let me step back and I'll hand over to Anna Mercy for the next section.
Thanks, Gareth. You could just move on to the next slide. Thanks. So I'm Anna Mercy. I'm the team leader for the Experts and Mentors programme, which is one of the early years recovery programme that Gareth just mentioned. So I'm going to give you a bit more detail about the programme and also looking for your feedback in the breakout sessions that we're going to have a little bit later on. Can we move on, please? So this is part of the Stronger Practice programme. So this is designed so that all settings will be able to access the online child development training that will be freely available. But we know that some settings will need more support. So those settings that will specifically be able to apply are just listed down in the third bullet. So settings that are judged to be RI or below from Ofsted, those that have higher numbers of early years pupil premium, children with special educational needs and disabilities, and higher numbers of children taking up the disadvantaged two-year offer. Local authorities will also be able to identify to DfE other settings that don't fit into the criteria that have a specific need. So those settings will be able to apply to take part in this programme. The programme is a combination of face-to-face and virtual support in the form of an expert and a mentor, and I'll explain in a minute what those two roles are and what that offers. We're going to test the package, to do a pilot from April of next year, April 22, in 2 of the RSC regions that we use in DfE. So that's the Lancashire and West Yorkshire region and the north of England, which broadly is the northwest and the northeast of the country. And they'll be able to access this support first, and we'll be able to test the delivery model. And as it says on the final bullet, we are looking to, to refine the programme as it goes and make changes based on the feedback we get from local authorities and settings in those regions. And if you're based in those regions, you'll be able to find out later how you can find out more information and get involved. So if we could just move on to the next slide, please. So the role of the expert is to support the setting leader and provide whole setting support. So we're looking for people who are strong leaders themselves to apply to DfE to take on this role of being an expert. and they will be expected to go into the setting that they're working with. So, you know, as I mentioned, face-to-face support in the setting to support the leader to identify which children are most impacted by COVID, but also look at what wider support can be offered to the setting. So it'll be a discussion between the supported setting leader and the expert about how best they should be deployed, and they can access 3 days of support from this person in the setting, as you know, as I said, as a sort of combination between the two following a diagnostic. The setting will also be able to access a mentor. So the mentor is more practitioner to practitioner support, and they will be able to help those in the setting with the online child development package that I mentioned. So, you know, provide more individual support on that training, but also look at how the individual could improve practice, look at curriculum, and again focus on specific children in the setting that might need support. And the mentors will provide an hour per fortnight, and this will be virtual, so it'll be via Teams or over the phone as appropriate. We're also looking for area leads, so they would be, if you like, a sort of super expert. So they would have their own setting to support, but would also be the first point of contact for the mentors and experts in their area. So if they needed some advice about the relationship with the setting or any issues that they were having or any blockers, then the area lead will be able to provide that support. And all of these individuals, we're looking for people who work in settings now, so that, you know, that they've had experience of working through the pandemic, and so we'll be able to offer the best support. So there's more information on Foundation Year's website. It was actually published yesterday, the expressions of interest. So if you're based in these 2 regions that I mentioned, which is Lancashire and West Yorkshire, or the North region, and you'd be interested in applying to take on one of these roles, then there's information there. If you're a setting that would benefit from the support, then local authorities were all emailed yesterday with information about the programme, so that they will pass that on to you, so that you'll be able to apply if you thought that support was something that you could access. So as I mentioned, that will be from the summer term of this academic year. If we could just move on to the next slide, please. The contact, the mailboxes for the different regions. So if you've got any questions specifically about this in your region, then you can email us directly. And that's it from me. Thank you.